Now, starting webinar.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon. My name is Amy Connery, and I'm really excited to be spending the next few moments with you. The title of my presentation, as you probably know from the session, is Embrace Your Inner Imposter. And I am the Vice President and Chair of the Subscribed Institute at Zora. Really excited to be joining you. As I said, I've had a 20+ career in tech, first at a software company in kind of a marketing jack of all trades role. And then I was an industry analyst for around 19 years, where I had the opportunity to have a front seat for the development of a lot of exciting trends in the technology industry, including the advent and rise of software as a service, and all of the requisite shifts in the software industry that the SaaS trend or movement has ultimately resulted in. And now you can find practically anything as a service today. And now I work at Zora, where I help Zora's customers transform their businesses around subscription and as a service models. But what I'm really going to be talking with you all about is essentially fear and feelings of inadequacy, and honestly being vulnerable. This isn't a topic that I tend to talk a lot about, but I certainly have my share of experience with this, despite the fact that if you looked at my bio, or maybe if you know me, you might think of me as a pretty accomplished person. And that probably goes for most of the folks on the line today. So we're going to talk about something called imposter syndrome. We've all probably heard it in some form or phrase over the years, whether or not you like the term or the fact that it's called a syndrome. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I actually don't like either of these things. I think the main focus of imposter syndrome is this idea that you can experience feelings of inadequacy, maybe chronic self-doubt. No, chronic meaning it persists over time, maybe despite having a track record of accomplishment. And it's something that may override any feelings that you might have of accomplishment. In that I know for myself, I've sometimes and oftentimes am very goal oriented. So I'll have this goal in mind, and if only I accomplish that goal, or once I accomplish that goal, then I won't feel that way. And the reality is, for myself and probably for some of you on the phone as well, that hasn't actually been the case. And so I've done some research on imposter syndrome. This diagram was done in 1985, which is why it looks the way that it does, before all of the amazing graphics that PowerPoint and others after it have enabled us to create in our presentations. What you may or may not be able to see in this graphic is that imposter syndrome is essentially a cycle. You could call it a vicious cycle, right? And it's something that continues on even once you have an accomplishment. Maybe you feel some relief that you had that accomplishment, you get some positive feedback, but for whatever reason, there's this continued self-doubt, maybe anxiety, that impacts you in your next achievement-related task that you might get. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I was talking to a few people in my household, which is pretty much all I've spoken to, or feel like I've spoken to live in the last several months. But in particular, I was talking to my husband about this presentation, and I read him the description of the session, and he said, you know, I have that. And it was interesting to me because I think oftentimes, and this is obviously a women's conference, you think of some of these things like imposter syndrome as gosh, it's just one more thing that women have to grapple with out in the world today. And it's true, you know, this is something that impacts women for sure, but it actually impacts men quite a bit as well. So if you kind of look at this, these two charts here, about 85% of women and men have these feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt at some point in time, maybe to slightly varying degrees, but in general, we can agree this isn't just something that impacts women. But If we think of feelings like inadequacy and self-doubt, and there was an article recently in Harvard Business Review, you may or may not have seen it, that basically said, can we stop calling this imposter syndrome? Really what it is, are the manifestation of a lot of the inequities that women face in the world today, particularly women in color, particularly women in certain environments. And so if we think of the areas that we are all working in the STEM space, we're outnumbered. And particularly as you move on in your career, move up in the organization, and in particular in certain departments or areas within STEM companies, it can be difficult for you to see people that look like you, to find shared experiences with your colleagues. And that can exacerbate some of these feelings of self-doubt, feelings of inadequate, it's a difficult word to say, inadequacy, as well. And then, when we talk about imposter syndrome and self-doubt, these are maybe that's, let's say, the core of the crux of the issue, but there are a lot of manifestations or symptoms that might occur in the workplace as a result. So this was something that I found particularly interesting. If you think of, just look at this from left to right, I know there's a lot on this slide, but the percent of women in STEM whom, and the first, you're having to provide more evidence of competence than others to prove themselves. Do they feel like whenever it is they're going to even ask a question? I find myself doing that sometimes. I'm going to ask a question. It's just going to be really quick. And here's why I'm asking the question. So silly. But I do it all the time, as if I have to justify why I get to ask a question or why my question is important. When I know if I were to stand outside myself and advise myself, that it is important, likely that the question that I have, and it's coming from experience, et cetera, et cetera. But like I said, these are systemic and these are chronic issues that impact a lot of us. The second one, that colleagues may have suggested that they work fewer hours after they have children. I had an experience once. I remember I have three sons, and I don't remember if it was my second or third after they were born. And I give a fair amount of talks, and I oftentimes talk about my family, as I'm doing right now, in my talks. And I got off stage, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, well, you said you had children. And I said, yes, I do. And they said, well, who's caring for them right now? And I'll never forget that, because of course I already had maybe a little bit of maternal guilt, especially because I would just gotten off of my leave. But second, I thought, I can never imagine a male colleague of mine being asked that same question, but it happens, right? This other one, feeling pressure to play a stereotypical feminine role, asterisk and the bottom of this chart, such as office mother or dutiful daughter. Another one that I know has come up as well in our team is not so much in the time of COVID, but it was, office party organizer. Oh, okay, it's a holiday. We need to organize some food or organize a get together. And it always seemed to fall on the same people. And oftentimes those people happen to be women. And the assumption might be maybe the men aren't as good at it, but that's not fair to them either. Maybe there's some really great event planners on the team that happen to be male that we just haven't given a chance. So, I think a lot of these are, we've experienced all of them, and, it's easy to kind of chuckle about some of these, and some are more serious than others. But they can have real ramifications for career path and career growth. Again, this is another Harvard Business Review sourced set of statistics, but if you kind of take male or men on the left-hand side, our male colleagues, and women on the right-hand side, there was a survey looking at how many of MBA graduates of Harvard Business School actually negotiated their job offers. And you can see a pretty big disparity between those that negotiated and those that didn't. And I can, raise my hand as being in that category. The last role that I took, I was so excited for the role and so excited to participate that I took the offer right away. Never occurred to me to negotiate. And I remember the hiring manager afterwards asking me, he's like, are you sure? You're sure you're not going to negotiate? And I second guess that to this day. Gosh, I should have done that. But I didn't. Feeling, and of course, those types of things, can have ramifications for years and years. Feeling self-doubt about job performance and careers. Both men and women can feel this. Initiating salary negotiations. When women negotiate, first of all, they do it less frequently, 4 times less. And when they negotiate, they ask for less money. And then this last one is something that really resonates with me. I read a book that you may have read called How Women Rise. And there was a whole chapter on the fact that when women are looking to move to the next stage in their career, or maybe when they're looking to apply for a job, they don't feel comfortable unless they've met all of the criteria of that job, everything that that job description asks for. Whereas with men, they're often comfortable with much less experience, going for that job. They don't have to meet all of that criteria before they're comfortable putting themselves out there. I can learn on the job. I've done something similar. I'm absolutely qualified. And we don't always have that confidence. Now, the rest of my presentation is really focused on what to do about it. And when, everything that I talked about up front, hopefully you feel a lot of that. Well, not hopefully, chances are you feel all of that on a visceral level. I hope that you never feel inadequate or self-doubt, et cetera. But I'm guessing, and the statistics say, that you probably do. So the next question is, okay, what do we do about it? And when I started to look into this, most of what I read looked something like this, right? It's something you got to beat, right? 4 ways to fight it. This hidden career trap might be worse than imposter syndrome. And it was exhausting to me to see the literature. And it reminded me quite a bit of all of the content. And excuse me if this is one of your favorite magazines, but I must say, when I stand in the checkout line at the grocery store, all of these magazines that I think are probably marketed to women that, to be honest, I don't know how great they're going to make me feel or how much information they're going to really give me that's going to help me or change my life. And I felt the same way with this imposter syndrome kind of nomenclature, which marketed to women. It's always that, something you got to get rid of, right? You need to get rid of pieces of yourself in order to be happy, whether it's your belly or your, imposter syndrome. That it should be super easy, right? 4 ways to fix it. And if it's not easy, then there's probably something wrong with you, right? And if that doesn't contribute to feelings of inadequacy, I don't know what does. Hey, success comes easy to everyone else. You're the only one who can't figure out this quick fix to, whether it's to falling asleep or, figuring out how to be less fearful in the workplace or to finally give yourself the credit that you deserve. Hey, another thing that women have been taught and socialized over the years is that other people's perceptions and needs are more important than your own. And sometimes that might be the perception and need of the business, right? I don't want to ask, or I don't want to put myself out there. But being the biggest advocate for yourself, the way that I'm sure you would advocate for a coworker, for someone on your team. Frankly, anything less than perfect is unacceptable. That message is ridiculous because none of us are perfect. We're all trying our best. We're all, dealing with a lot right now. And so the idea that if you feel fearful or if you have some self-doubt, there's something wrong with that. I don't agree with that. And then finally, that anything that we're talking about is something to be ashamed of or something that you shouldn't share with anyone else. Gosh, I'm sharing it with hundreds of people right now. Hey, I feel inadequate sometimes, despite being accomplished. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong in the room. I look around me and wonder what I'm doing there. And I feel that way. And so the question, or what I need to think about and what I want to talk about with you is, how do I manage that, right? How do I deal with that? Because it's there. I am 20 plus years into my career. It's never going to go away. It isn't. I've accomplished things that I set out to accomplish. I feel good for a little while. And then, I still have this fear. So there are 3 things that I want to talk about. The first is embrace your whole self, even your fear. It's totally part of you. And, one example that I want to give of how I have done this, and I've done it many times, and there's, all these, I think it says on the Lululemon bag somewhere, do something that scares you every day, right? There's a reason. This idea of working, doing something that are scary within controlled environments. it does something. It makes fear more familiar to you, and in a way, less scary. So one of my fear moments that I can remember early on in my career, I'm not a good singer at all, but it was singing karaoke, and it was singing karaoke at a place where there were some really, really good singers. I've gone karaoke a bunch of different times with friends, and we're all ridiculous singers, and I miss those times. I look forward to going back to those after COVID. But this was like a serious place where I knew that getting up was putting myself out there. And I let the coworkers that I went with pick the song that I was going to sing. And they picked The Rose by Bette Midler, which is a beautiful song, but is not an easy song to sing. And I remember feeling like I am going to get up on that stage and everyone's going to expect me to like sound like Bette Midler or do justice to this song somehow. And they're all going to be insulted by how terrible I am going to be at singing this song. And I was absolutely awful singing the song, but something really surprising happened when I put myself out there. Whether it was because I was so bad that the audience felt sorry for me, or whether it happened that they were pretty empathetic people in the audience in that particular time. But I did my song and I got off, and people were like, that was wonderful. You were so brave for doing that. That just emboldened me to do a song I wasn't thinking of singing, and now I am. I will never forget that experience, primarily because of the fear that I felt initially, not so much because of how wonderful I did, and then how embracing that fear kind of gave me a rush that you really can't get in any way. I also was lucky recently to have an opportunity to hear from Stacey Abrams at a organization that I'm part of. And she said something that really, really resonated with me around fear and imposter syndrome at this event, which was last March. And I loved the idea. She said, I believe in making fear my friend. I take it out to lunch. We have a nice chat. I excavate it and I figure out what's going on. So there's something here about making fear tangible in some way. And that's the next thing that I want to talk about. This is personifying your fear and your courage. And I'll give you a little anecdote to explain what I mean by this. There was someone who's no longer working with me, but there was someone during a stage in my career that, to me, every time I went into a meeting, he would either look at me or make comments that undermined what I was trying to achieve, in a way that he awoke my inner imposter, right? If I didn't feel self-doubt, this individual, for whatever reason, would trigger that for me. Probably not that person's fault, maybe some my fault, maybe some their fault. I don't want to vilify the person, but for whatever reason, this particular individual really made it difficult for me to go into a meeting and ask a question and make a presentation with the same confidence and courage that I needed. And so I was talking to a coach that I work with about this, and I said, I've got this meeting later on today. I'm really worried about it because I know every time I go into a meeting with this person, I just clam up. I can't speak. I can't ask the questions I want to ask. And she said, well, I have a suggestion for you. She said, that particular person makes you feel really, inadequate and triggers self-doubt. Is there someone that does the opposite? Is there someone who you could say is your biggest cheerleader and maybe helps you feel more confident? When you're talking with that person, they're going to agree with what you say and really embolden you. And I said, actually, there is someone, and this person, who may or may not be listening, I mentioned this to her a year or so after, that I used her as, Alvina is her name, and she was formerly the CIO at the company that I work for. And when I'd go to meetings with her, she would yes, what she said, and really help me feel more emboldened to speak up. And so my coach said, imagine Alvina in the meeting there, but put her in between you and this individual that makes you feel inadequate. The individual is going to be there, but put them way in the corner of your mind and put Alvina farther up. And it really, really helped me. And this is a trick that I use often. Those two people are not people that I work with anymore, but they're absolutely situations where I go into meetings. Maybe it's not so much that there's an individual, but I'm going to give a presentation or I'm going to say something controversial. And I know that I want to have someone in my corner who's going to help me to feel more confident about what it is I have to say. And if you think back to this cycle, right, and having that, whether it's hopefully it's an actual person from real life, but they may not be literally working with you at that point in time, but having that literal or figurative cheerleader, for lack of a better word, can short circuit every part of the syndrome cycle. So when you get started with that task, when you're faced with anxiety or self-doubt down the road, when you get that positive feedback, thinking about personifying your courage as well as your fear is something that's been really useful to me. And then another personification that, as I was thinking this through, I was reading Harry Potter with my youngest son, and it reminded me of the Bogart reference. So for those of you that are Harry Potter fans or have read that yourself or with your children, you know what I'm talking about. If not, it's exactly that idea of personifying your fear. So this is a spirit that for the individual would personify the thing that scares them the most. So for this particular Neville Longbottom, it was Professor Snape. So this image is not of Professor Snape, it's Professor Snape dressed in his grandmother's clothing. So it was taking that fear and turning it ridiculous somehow, right? Making it silly, whether it's your fear of spiders, turning it into roller skates, right? It's that same type of thing. And different ways of doing this can help people in different ways, right? So then finally, the thing that I want to talk about is fueling your confidence. And if you feel alone in your self-doubt, you shouldn't. This is kind of a non-scientific poll, right? But everyone who feels this way is smart, successful, and people that you think probably have their stuff together, right? Everyone's dealing with this in some regard, even the most successful people. So don't feel as if you're alone, and don't feel as if what you know and what others know is so vastly different, right? A lot of times we make assumptions about what other people know or how other people feel. The reality is you have something to bring to the table, to the discussion, to the meeting that's different from what everyone else has to bring. And it's incredibly valuable. Now, there are going to be others who know more than you in certain areas, but they're not going to have your shared perspective. And likely they feel the same way that you do. And then finally, another pop culture reference. If you haven't heard of Harry Potter, hopefully you've heard of Wizard of Oz, or hopefully you've heard of both, because they're both great stories. But if you think of the Cowardly Lion, right? It wasn't that he had to find courage outside of himself. He always had it all along. All he really needed to do was to recognize it in himself and, frankly, to personify it. So true courage, right, is going towards danger when you're afraid. And that's the kind of courage that we all have in the technology industry, in the world that we live in today. So I hope that some of these techniques that I've talked about in this short time here have been helpful for you, things that you might be able to adopt. With that, I would love to see if there are any questions.
Hi, this is Jerry. Actually, we don't have any questions in the Q&A, and we have about 1 minute left. So I'm going to ask a question.
Sure.
When you first found out about the imposter syndrome, did you talk about it with other people? I found when I first found out, I started asking and I started finding out it was like everyone had imposter syndrome.
I did. And I was talking about doing this presentation with people, and there were a lot of people that said, gosh, I've felt that way, or I've heard of that. And it was, I mentioned the one article that I read that said, stop telling women that they have imposter syndrome. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm doing a presentation on imposter syndrome. And here's this article saying, stop saying, gosh, maybe it's not something I should be talking about. But the more that I dug into it, it was basically that, women shouldn't blame themselves for feeling self-doubt, for feeling inadequacy. It's likely the system that they're operating in that's created those feelings on their behalf. which I agree with. But in any case, whether, we are creating them ourselves, whether it's created by, racist and sexist systems that we live in, we have to deal with it. And so for me, accepting that this is something that is going to be around for the long haul has been the first step for figuring out how to finally coexist with, whether you call it my imposter, my fear, whatever it might be.
That's great. Perfect answer. And we are exactly on time. Thank you so much,
All
Amy.
right.
We appreciate it. I hope everyone's having a good time. And please don't forget to rate the session. It's right at the top of the page. You can just click on it and give it a rating. And for every rating of each session you do, if you give us your email address, that's one entry into our drawing for some great prizes. So thanks so much. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.